I am honored to introduce today's session, 3 Panel A, entitled St. John Paul II on Human Life and the Natural Family. And our first panelist today, speaker, is Rafael Santamaria, Law School Dean of the Universidad Católica in San Pablo. His talk is John Paul II's contribution to biotechnology and human rights. Dr. Rafael Santamaria D'Angelo is Dean of the Faculty of Law of the Catholic University of St. Paul in Arequipa, Peru, and is a researcher at the UNESCO Chair in Bioethics and Human Rights at the European University of Rome, Italy. Professor Santamaria was advisor to the Ministry of Justice on Human Rights and representative of the Peruvian delegation to the United Nations Annual Ministerial Review in New York. Dr. Rafael Santamaria has been visiting professor of in the Doctorate of History and Theory in European Law at Tor Vergata University Faculty of Law in Rome, Italy, and Boston College of Law in the United States. Thank you, Doctor.
My first words are for gratitude for the invitation to the organizers of this event, to Ave Maria Law School and Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński University. I especially want to thank Professor Ligia de Jesus. A reflection on the contributions of John Paul II, today St. John Paul II, are very illuminating in the current context, especially if you reflect on biotechnology and the challenge it represents for humanity. What did John Paul II tell us about biotechnology? Some ideas to keep in mind. A first aspect prior to the contribution of John Paul II that I would like to clarify is about biotechnological knowledge. It's necessary and very important to know its definition and method. Indeed, biotechnology is understood as a human knowledge that schemes with the manipulation or transformation of some living beings a certain benefits for the human beings. Based on science and technology, it applies the systematization, verification, and utility of knowledge to living beings, from bacteria, plants, animals, to human beings, in order to achieve greater well-being, with the consequence that this entails for all humanity, as well as for the environment that surrounds it. Now, John Paul II faced with so many advances in this type of knowledge, says that science and technology are a wonderful product of a God-given human creativity. It highlights the particular vocation of the human beings to participate responsibility in God's creative action in the world. In this integration of scientific and technological knowledge applied to medicine, it is a key to highlight the benefits that the latter has contributed and still does to humanity. However, John Paul II refers that medical science is a servant science, not an end in itself. It is meant to serve the total well-being of everyone. It is the work of people in the service of other people. This human creativity capacity shows us the need to understand that they do not make man the absolute arbiter of the earth's governance, but the Creator's co-worker, a stupendous mission, but one which is also marked by precise boundaries that can never be transgressed with impunity. In this sense, this co-responsibility of man inspires biotechnology knowledge thus saying that it does not correspond to be evaluated only from economics point of view, but must integrate an ethical evaluation, since clearly to speak of the autonomy of medical science as if were independent of moral and ethical consideration is to unleash a force that cannot but cause grievous harm to man himself. If we speak of a benefit for man, of a common good that emerges from scientific research, it shows it is a consequence, a double perspective. On the one hand, do not be fixed on anti-cultural position that retards the progress of humanity. And on the other hand, do not be offended what man the most precious, the dignity of his person, destined for the real progress in unity of his physical, intellectual, and spiritual being. The growth of biotechnology does show that this ambivalence, which can lead it to truly development and individual and social level, with a sense of solidarity in relation to others, or which represent instrumentalizing the other, with a tendency to manipulation and the violence. In this sense, a combination of inspiration and limits in those show before biotechnology, the same one, and that has a reference, the respect for human dignity, the authentic development in a personal social way, but as a requirement in the present and of the responsibility towards the future. John Paul II, aware of this, pointed out, I have never returned to this subject because I am convinced, with regard to certain results and claims of experimentation on human beings, that not one can remain silent, and especially not the Church, whose present silence will in the future be condemned by history and even by the devotees of the science themselves. Faced with the continuous advance in medicine and biotechnology, he did not show opposition to progress, but his concern that this threatened human life, especially the most defenseless. From this perspective, the defense of life from conception to natural death is not a religious imposition of faith, but a response to the values of human nature itself, with an additional idea, the bioethical imperative about wherever everything that is scientifically demonstrable has to be ethically acceptable, remind us that human life is a gift, and that it remains precious even when marked by suffering and limitations. A gift to be accepted and to be loved at all times, received without pay, and to be placed without pay at the service of others. The challenge of biotechnology shows the needs to find in the family, society, the state, and the international community the corresponding institutions to achieve a greater dialogue to the scope and the consequence of these technological knowledges, also aware of inalienable corrections and with human rights. In relation to human rights fundamental points, one of the very rich themes of John Paul II pontificate has been his reflection on human rights. We are interested below in harmony with the previous arguments to share some central ideas around this point of his magisterium that will serve as a dialogue to biotechnological knowledge. The progress in the international community regarding humanity rights is considerable. If one thinks about the historical context after war, with the emergence of the United Nations, the International Bill of Human Rights, and many other international documents, these are perceived to be understood as rights inherent to human beings, which are recognized by the mere belonging to the human species and as such are a priori to the states. Given this, John Paul II war of the great contradictions. Precisely in an age when the inviolable rights of the person are solemnly proclaimed and the value of life is publicly affirmed, the very right to life is being denied or trampled upon, especially at the more significant moments of existence, the moment of birth and the moment of death. About these contradictions, he himself questioned the root of these are points to a deformation of the concept of subjectivity that recognizes as a subject of right only the person who enjoys full or at least incipient autonomy and who emerges from a state of total dependence on others. This dualism breaks all parity and rejection of the instrumentalization of human beings, typical of the theory of human rights, since its goal be failing to recognize and protect the weakest and most defenseless subject. Think of the unborn, of the sick in need to help, among others. He will later at a key point of this problem. In a notion of freedom which exalts the isolated individual in an absolute way and gives no place to solidarity, to openness to others and service of them. Freedom negates and destroys itself and becomes a factor leading to the destruction of others, what it no longer recognizes and respects in essential link with the true. Under this liberal subjectivism, the same coexistence is questioned in the perspective to the consideration of the other. Science and objective norms disappear, thus society, democracy, and state are questioned. Indeed, society becomes a mass of individuals placed side by side, but without any mutual bonds. Each one wishes to assert himself independently of the other, and in fact intended to make his own interest prevail. In this way, democracy, contradicting of its own principles, effectively moves toward a form of totalitarianism. The state is not longer the common home, where all can live together on the basis of principle of fundamental equality, but is transformed into a grand state, which arrogates to itself the right to dispose of the life of the weakest and the most defenseless members, from the unborn child to the elderly, in the name of the public interest, which is really nothing but the interest of one part. Coexistence in itself, in the most genuine or supportive way, becomes a mere convivence by a consumer mentality, by which life is valued only if it appears to be useful in some way or can bring satisfaction and pleasure. Suffering is rejected as a meaningless evil to be avoided at all costs. Ultimately, the very idea of human dignity is this democratic relativism, and with this range to dignified and undignified life goes against its very foundation, its very essence. As has been argued before, the institutionality of the state is impossible when the assessment of the human person is reduced to mere subjectivity, as far from the common good. In this aspect, John Paul II concern not only leads to questioning the root of the contradiction, but also to establishing important points which we could say are basic on human rights. Even before being elected as Pope, Carol Wojtyla is a in his philosophical contribution, reminded us in Person and Act about the human experience of the man who is me, which, being the unique experience, is composed of many experiences as a subject and object, with an inner and other experience related to an identity. Personal experience is related to the experience of others. We can associate this reflection with his speech at the United Nations when they state that, certainly, there is not a single model of political and economic organization of human freedom, since different culture and diverse historical experience give rise, in a free and responsible society, to different institutional forms. But one thing is to affirm a legitimate pluralism of form or free choice, and other thing is to deny the universality or intelligible character of the nature of man, of the human experience. Precisely, in the face situation of hopeless and inconsistent of the last millennium, one thing of crime against humanity covered by apparent legality, something very valuable of the law stand out. The renewal of a juridical culture of respect for the objective requirement of the universal moral law as the basis and ultimate criteria of all positive legal enactment. What is needed to, in effect, in a rediscovery on those essential and innate human and moral values which flow from and very nature and truth of the human person, and which express and safeguard the dignity of the person. Values which not individual, not majority, and not state can ever create, modify, or destroy, but must only acknowledge, respect, and promote. This renewal of a legal culture leads a legal scholar to the constant depending of the concept of human person, the foundation of a legal reality. Indeed, referring to the universality of human nature, dignity, and natural law, always represent a motivation to continue studying the anthropological foundation and present to the current contemporary debate, and increasing, integrate, and update human reflections. In this sense, in the face of biotechnological advance, it is not about renouncing a great tradition and millenary contribution received of the concept of the human person, which integrates the theological and philosophical synthesis, and which show the need to preserve the unity of human nature expressed in a body and in a spirit, as well its individual and social dimensions. In this regard, John Paul II refers the need for a philosophy of genuine metaphysics range culpable as it, or regarding empirical data in order to affirm something absolutely ultimating as foundation is for true. Here, I do not mean to speak to metaphysics in the sense of a specific school or particular history current of truth. I want only to state the reality and truth to transcend the factual and empirical, and to vindicate the human being's capacity to know its transcendent and metaphysical dimension in a way that is a true and certain, albeit imperfect and analogical. In this sense, with this finish, metaphysics should not be seen as an alternative to anthropology, since it's a metaphysics which makes it impossible to ground the concept of person dignity in virtue of their spiritual nature. In a special way, the person constitutes a privileged locus for the encounter with being, and hence the metaphysical inquiry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. One of the things that I find really interesting is quoting John Paul II in his desire to be that the church be involved with these conversations early and often in bioethics. One of the things that the church is currently engaged with in the Vatican, and which I've had the privilege to attend, are conferences on transhumanism and the movement and counter transhumanism from the church's ethical standpoints, as well as the big question that the church is having to put forth right now, which is what happens when scientists create artificial intelligence that has cognitive self-realization? Is that life? So it's good right now that the church is coming forth and having these conversations early and often so that scientists aren't the ones to make the decision on their own. Thank you.